The headline here is Trump expands 50% steel and aluminum tariffs to include 407 additional product.
I got a problem with that guy. He's signing all these forms, Cleveland Cliffs.
President Donald Trump has once again expanded his trade war. The White House confirmed that tariffs of 50% on steel and aluminum now cover hundreds of additional products. What began with raw materials now includes car parts, refrigerators, baby strollers, even the aluminum in soda cans. For American families, this means higher grocery bills and more expensive cars. For U.S. partners like Canada, it disrupts exports that depend on metal packaging and industrial inputs.
And why doesn't he just stay in the U.S.? Because I'm done with this guy signing letters saying, yeah, bring all the steel down to the U.S., tariff the crap out of Canadians.
This is not just a technical trade measure. It is a shock that links everyday costs with international trade tensions. Let's take a closer look at what this expansion means inside the United States and across North America.
The Trump administration is quietly making it even more expensive to import hundreds of items that all of us would see on store shelves. Well, a whole bunch of household items impacted, and some industrial items too. Look at this: cranes, bulldozers, wind turbines, rail cars.
For consumers, the most immediate effect is inflation. CNN's reporting highlighted that import prices rose sharply in July, defying the White House claim that foreign exporters would absorb the tariffs. Analysts such as Pantheon Economics stress that American businesses and households are carrying nearly all of the cost. That cost is not small. Supply chain experts have estimated that the expanded tariff list now covers around $320 billion of products, creating roughly $160 billion in extra expenses that flow directly into the economy. Industries tied to steel and aluminum are already reacting. Farmers and builders depend on tractors, gearboxes, pumps, and construction machinery now hit by higher tariffs. Legacy manufacturer John Deere recently announced layoffs at 3 Midwestern facilities, citing weaker sales and the impact of tariffs on production costs. When major employers respond this way, the shock spreads into local communities. The administration's stated goal is to rebuild American steel and aluminum. Yet investment in those sectors requires billions of dollars and long-term certainty. The process so far has been anything but certain. Economists describe it as a policy direction that may be defensible in theory but clumsy in execution. This uncertainty, now often called Trumpian uncertainty, discourages companies from expanding or hiring because tariff rules can change with little warning.
We aren't going to roll over. We aren't going to kiss his backside. We're going to fight like we've never fought before.
Trump's tariff expansion has not gone unanswered. Canada, America's closest trading partner, has pushed back on 2 tracks. At the public level, Ontario Premier Doug Ford has taken direct aim at Washington. He calls the tariffs a hidden tax on American families, noting that Canada buys more than $350 billion of U.S. goods each year. Ford announced a $70 million Canadian program to support workers, pressed Ottawa to tighten quotas on cheap steel, and made it clear Canada will not roll over. On the federal track, Prime Minister Mark Carney has chosen strategic patience. He has directed aid to sectors such as lumber and agriculture while keeping negotiations with Washington open. His government insists Canada will only accept a fair deal, not a short-term fix that weakens national interests. Ford and Carney show 2 sides of one response. Other provinces have also voiced strong opposition, while unions, industries, and policymakers align behind the same message. Canada is standing firm, defending its workers and industries, and refusing to be cornered into a bad deal. The expansion of steel and aluminum tariffs is more than a policy adjustment. For Americans, it means higher prices when inflation is already a concern. For businesses, it adds uncertainty that discourages long-term investment. For Canada, the answer has been resilience. Ottawa and the provinces are backing workers and reinforcing supply chains, sending a message that they will not accept a bad deal. Trump's strategy may unsettle markets, but it also reveals which partners are prepared to stand firm. The coming months will show whether these tariffs strengthen industry or simply confirm that trade wars rarely produce clear winners.
of days. Dominic LeBlanc says he remains confident that negotiations to reach that trade deal will continue. But this comes after the U.S. imposed a 35% tariff on Canadian goods not covered under CUSMA.
Dominic LeBlanc also says the Prime Minister and President will likely speak over the next number of days.
On August 1st, President Trump imposed a 35% tariff on Canadian goods not covered under the USMCA. It was a sharp escalation from the previous 25%, and it came without warning. Officially, Trump pointed to fentanyl trafficking as justification. But inside Washington, the rationale wasn't so clear-cut.
The only reason
Canada retaliated. The only other country in the world who retaliated on tariffs was the Chinese.
According to U.S. trade officials, the real trigger was retaliation. Canada's decision to maintain counter tariffs first introduced under the Trudeau government, covering $60 billion worth of U.S. goods. Today, those tariffs are still in place, especially on steel and aluminum. Canada may not have escalated, but it didn't back down either. Only two countries have dared to push back on Trump's tariff regime: China and Canada. And while others like the EU, Japan, and Mexico avoided confrontation, Canada stood firm and became the first to be hit with the full 35% rate ahead of all others. Yet even under pressure, Canada did not strike back. Prime Minister Mark Carney had warned of possible countermeasures if no deal was reached by August 1st. But that day came and went without any new tariffs from Ottawa. Instead, Carney took a different path. He maintained existing measures, defended the need to protect Canada's domestic steel and aluminum industries, and avoided feeding the escalation. His message was clear. Canada would respond, but not react. His tone emphasized stability and principle, building the Canadian way through sustainability, collaboration, and restraint. This was not weakness. It was a calculated choice to keep the door open for negotiation while holding firm on national priorities.
So these tariff rates are pretty much set.
For the deals that aren't ready yet, they're going to get the reciprocal rates soon, and then we would expect that there might continue to be negotiations with those countries.
On the American side, signals were inconsistent. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer told CBS that the tariff rates were effectively set and unlikely to change. Meanwhile, White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett told NBC that negotiations were still possible and ongoing with countries like Canada. Adding to the confusion, the Trump administration has treated every tariff announcement as if it were part of a deal, even when imposed unilaterally. Whether this is a deliberate strategy or not, one thing is clear. The only person who will ultimately decide the outcome is Trump himself. Still, he hasn't shut the door. Trump confirmed that Carney had tried to call him. While the two leaders haven't spoken yet, both sides now acknowledge the possibility of a direct conversation in the coming days. Back in Ottawa, optimism is rising, cautiously. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc says negotiations are continuing and that Canada is ready to stay in Washington as long as needed. Canadian officials now have a better read on U.S. concerns after meetings with Ambassador Greer and Commerce Secretary Lutnick. Importantly, Canada doesn't appear rushed. According to a recent report from the Royal Bank of Canada, the 35% tariff hike is not expected to significantly alter the country's economic outlook. That gives Ottawa room to maneuver, without needing to concede too soon or too much.
Other countries, the EU, Mexico, Japan, did not choose to retaliate, did not choose to stand up to this president. And I think the world made a mistake a few months ago by making that choice. So right now, Donald Trump is in a position where he can pick on Canada, make an example of us, and send a message to every other country.
Trump's approach is forceful. He sets deadlines, announces tariffs unilaterally, and defines terms as he goes. But the response from Canada hasn't been emotional or reactive. It's been patient, deliberate, and grounded. If a deal is reached in the coming days, it will be because Canada chose to stay in the room, not because it caved. Trump may own the microphone, but Ottawa still holds leverage. And in a trade war where unpredictability is often the loudest voice, quiet resolve might just be the most powerful one.
We're more united and more determined to stand up for Canada than at any time in my entire lifetime. We made it clear to President Trump and to the world that Canada is not for sale and Canada will never, ever be a 51st state.
President Trump has been celebrating his tariff campaign as a victory, pointing to the billions collected for Washington. In reality, those tariffs are backfiring at home, driving up prices for American families and adding pressure on U.S. businesses. While the president frames tariffs as proof of American strength, Canada is holding firm. On August 18th, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Premier Doug Ford met in Ottawa to coordinate their response, focusing on how to strengthen competitiveness at home. The contrast could not be sharper. Short-term revenue in Washington, long-term resilience in Canada.
And important discussion with Premier Ford this morning on a variety of aspects for the Ontario economy, the Canadian economy, which of course includes trade but goes much more to the issues that we can control and how we build out from within.
We have to hold firm and we have to create the environment. For instance, the steel sector. You know, the steel sector, we have to look at the large infrastructure projects, shipbuilding, and make sure that large-scale infrastructure projects like a pipeline, the steel pipes come from Ontario.
On August 18th, Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford stood side by side in Ottawa. Their focus was not on what Washington might do next, but on building Canada's own strength. Carney stressed the need to focus on housing, on the steel and auto sectors, and on new fields such as artificial intelligence. His point was simple. Canada must build competitiveness from within, not depend on external decisions. Ford delivered the same message in his own way.
We're united on the message of let's start worrying about how we can be competitive here. Donald Trump is so unpredictable. I don't even know if he knows what he's doing tomorrow morning.
He reminded Canadians that Trump is unpredictable, that no one can forecast what the president will announce tomorrow. The answer, he said, is to make Canada the most competitive place to invest by reducing taxes, cutting red tape, and keeping production at home. He cited last year's record numbers. In 2024, Ontario attracted $39.9 billion Canadian dollars in foreign direct investment, creating 25,000 jobs. To him, the challenge is to repeat and expand those results even under the pressure of tariffs. Both leaders framed their approach as a united one. They called it Team Canada, not just a slogan, but a strategy that brings together provinces, Indigenous communities, and businesses. And the message was not only for Canadians. Ford reminded audiences in the United States that tariffs on Canadian goods are effectively taxes on American families because the two economies are so deeply linked. Canada is not standing still. Over the past months, governments at both federal and provincial levels have rolled out packages worth tens of billions of dollars to shield industries and workers. Ontario alone has launched a $1.5 billion financing program for companies hurt by U.S. tariffs and is investing $2.5 billion in skills training so workers can transition into new opportunities. A further $500 million fund has been created to process critical minerals, ensuring that resources mined in Ontario are refined domestically. The effort goes beyond defensive spending. Ontario has signed new internal trade agreements with every other province and territory, removing barriers under the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. Officials estimate that could add more than $200 billion to economic output in the coming years. The federal government, meanwhile, continues to prioritize major investments in healthcare, infrastructure, and housing to reinforce social and economic stability. Together, these measures show that Canada is using the tariff crisis as a catalyst for long-term transformation.
Let's stop worrying about Donald Trump. We'll start focusing on Ontario, on Canada, and all the other provinces and territories.
Trump presents tariffs as proof of success, but they are raising costs in his own country. Canada is responding by holding firm and focusing on long-term competitiveness. This is not only a trade fight, it is a test of endurance, and Canada is showing it is ready. Carney and Ford may differ in style, but both underline the same message. Canada is not retreating, not waiting, and not bending. It is adapting, rebuilding, and preparing for the next decade. Trump's tariffs may have set the stage, but Canada has chosen to write its own script. And in this unfolding clash, endurance and vision will matter far more than revenue headlines from Washington.